Hey gang, welcome back to System Breakdowns. Today we're talking about Leon Edwards, who you frankly might not have heard of before he fought Nate Diaz, to be totally honest. But, that being said, he is on a 9-fight win streak. Would have been 10 if not for a very brutal accidental eye gouge to Bilal Muhammad, but frankly he was winning that fight. He probably would have won that fight. Why is he on this long win streak? That's what we're going to talk about today in Systems, because we want to talk about the things that has put him in a position where he can consistently win using the same system. And we're going to talk about how he uses things like high percentile principle, conservation of motion, and conservation of energy. We're going to talk about how he plays a patient game to put the fight always on his terms, and how he stays within his system and lures them into his system so that he can consistently win it. So we're going to break this all down today. I will say before we get started, he's known most as a striker, but this guy also has a phenomenal clinch and wrestling game as well. And we're going to talk about all this today and how everything is one clear pathway that he follows that allows him to always win. So stay tuned. All right, so as we talk about Leon Edwards' striking, I will say that a lot of people tend to find him on the boring side. And I think it's because people are looking at very surface level stuff, and they're looking at one of a couple things. Either one, he's already a counter striker, and counter strikings don't appeal to a lot of people already because it's a slower pace. Two, most of his fights do not end in KOs. Most of his fights end in decision. And so for guys who are looking for these big brawlers, you know, your Francis Ngannou's or Derek Lewis's, or guys who have these high knockout rates like your Yuri Prohaska's and your Khamzat Chimaev's, if you are into that type of a fighter, Leon Edwards is not going to seem very exciting by comparison. And the other reason is that Leon Edwards essentially only throws one of about 5 different techniques. That's really it. 95% of what he throws is one of these 5 techniques. It's either a jab, a hook, cross, rear leg, roundhouse kick, or an elbow strike. That's 95% of what he throws. On occasion, I think on like 2 or 3 occasions I've seen him throw a front leg hook kick. I've seen him occasionally throw a lead side uppercut. And I've seen him occasionally throw front kicks. But these are rare. The majority of the time, he's not throwing this stuff. It's normally one of these 5 techniques. Added to that, he generally kind of puts them in boxes for use. So you'll see long periods of the fight where all you see this guy do is jab cross. You're like, man, this guy seems a little boring, right? But what they're not keeping in mind is that they're looking at the punches he throws and the kicks he throws, these very surface level things. What they're not looking at is the system that he's using to draw them in to consistently fall victim to these same 2 techniques. Why is this guy constantly getting hit with the same cross over and over again? He's got to be doing something to make it work, and this is what you need to look at when you talk about system building. And this is what Leon Edwards is great at. He focuses on their high percentile to draw them in and funnel them. We talked about funneling a lot on this channel, and it is a very useful technique. And what he's going to do is, so here's what essentially you're going to look at when you see his fights. Most of the time he fights southpaw. On occasion, like against Nate Diaz, he will occasionally switch and fight orthodox, special circumstances, but most of the time you're going to see him staying in southpaw. Defensively, you're going to see some stuff like as guys press forward, if he doesn't feel like it's a time to engage, he's going to put this hand out and he's going to cover high. But most of the time, he's looking to draw stuff out anyway, so he's actively ready to counter. And so I want to start by talking about what happens if they fall into his game, and then I'll talk about what happens when they fall out of it. So when he's here, generally his range, he likes to keep it at kicking range, where I can't quite punch the guy, but I can kick him without taking a step. This is where he likes to hang out. Occasionally he'll go inside or outside, but most of the time he stays at this range. Because he wants the type of counters he wants. He wants to be able to see their punches coming, because 95% of what they're going to throw from here is going to be punches. A lot of guys, he's at this kind of like edge range where guys don't feel like it's the right place to kick. And that suits him very well. This is why he gets a lot of punches. And what he's going to do is he's going to actively probe high to get them thinking about it. So you'll see on the outside a lot of this. Feinting the kick, probe, probe, probe. And what he's trying to do is draw out punches. Now, when they throw punches from here, he'll generally engage in one of a couple different tactics. One, he'll step out and he'll counter hook. That is something that he'll do a lot of, is a check hook where he steps out and draws them off the line. He likes doing that a lot. He did that a lot against RDA. The other thing you'll see him do is pull, so he'll probe, and then pull, jab, cross. You'll see him do a lot of that as well. If they start putting a lot of forward pressure on, he uses one of two techniques. Either one, he's going to draw them into an elbow. Sometimes he'll go ahead and get a collar tie and pull them into it. Sometimes he'll get an underhook. Clinch, we'll talk about that later on when we start talking about clinching. But this is to help keep them from pressing forward too hard. This is, if you looked at the Calvin Kattar versus Giga Chikadze, one of the problems Giga had was he kept getting backed up. This is because he didn't have a strategy that allowed him to take advantage of as he clashed in to catch him with that elbow. Another guy we just talked about who does this is Deiveson Figueiredo. He's very good at this. As guys press in, if you're going to be an outside counter striker, you have to have a solution for when guys try to put a lot of pressure on you. And this is the same system that Figueiredo does, whereas guys pressure in, he catches them with that elbow. Because the range has tightened up, so he takes advantage of that. The other thing you'll see him do is if he gets pressured a lot, he'll also start shooting reactive shots and threaten the level change. So guys don't feel like they can put a lot of forward pressure because he has a very, very good wrestling game. And in fact, to a lot of fans, it's very underrated, to be honest, because his wrestling game is excellent. And so guys feel like they can't put a lot of forward pressure like you normally do against counter fighters, because if they do, they're either going to eat an elbow or he's going to shoot underneath and get a leg. That's a major issue, which means that they've got to stay more on the outside where he wants to be. So he's going to probe, and he's going to pull out shots. He's going to lean back, pop, pop, pull, jab, cross. Or step off the line, and he's going to do a check hook, and if he can, he'll follow that up with a cross. So you see what I mean about how a lot of the fight, you're going to see him doing the same thing. He's probing, here, pop, pop. He's probing, step off. He's probing, pop. That's what you're going to see a lot of the fight. Now, sometimes this guy will not commit forward enough. One of a couple things happen. So first let's talk about when he gets out of outside range. If he can't keep this range, sometimes what happens is guys, as they start staying a little bit further outside, they start wanting to throw kicks from here. He knows this, so he's ready to counter the kicking game. And so he's got it in his pocket. He's ready to catch the kick and come in with a cross. You'll see him do this a lot. Occasionally you'll see him catch it and drive him back to the cage as well. But a lot of times he's just ready to go, bam! Take advantage of that. So, if the guy doesn't play the range he wants to play and throw high percentile, which is the punching, which is what he's really looking for, he's really looking for some form of a jab cross or something like that where he can basically stay on inside position a lot. He can pull and counter, or he can just beat him to the punch. He's mostly trying to play that kind of counter game. If he does time it wrong, he's got this hand up and he's got this hand ready to frame in case he does it wrong. If the range is wrong, if they start pressuring in here or here. Now, if the guy doesn't commit and the guy's standing to the outside, normally his strategy is one of a couple things. One, you start seeing him throw his kicks. He starts punishing them for not being active enough. And so this is where you start seeing he'll chop away at the leg. Particularly, you see this a lot against the Diaz fight, against Nate Diaz, because the Diaz brothers are already susceptible to leg attacks anyway. Also, he was trying to force him to go back to orthodox so that he could stay southpaw and stay in the open stance from there, rather than have to fight orthodox open stance. He throws a lot of body kicks. This is great to start taking away their cardio. And occasionally, he'll throw head kicks. He does this every once in a while, and when he does, he has a very high success rate with it. I think Bilal Muhammad was one of the guys he caught with it. He caught a bunch of guys with that high section roundhouse. He does it about once a fight, somewhere in there. So he doesn't do it a lot. He saves it for once in a while. And what I like about it is this. When guys are constantly expecting this kick to the body or occasion to the leg, they forget to defend the head because they're used to hanging out here and they tuck down, right? They know as soon as they see that hip moving and he feints the hip, he probes. He feints the hip, he probes. And then when he throws it, there's not a lot of telegraph and guys are thinking here. And then every once in a while, he changes it up and he goes high. This is a nice way of getting it so that you don't overuse the head kick and you can occasionally land it, and also to get them second guessing the body kick. So it's pretty tactical. The other things that you'll see him do is a pace change. One of the things I like is he'll go probe, light probe, bam, and get real aggressive out of nowhere. And guys don't know what to make of that. So it forces them to not be too inactive. So he's sitting out here trying to draw it, bah, bah, and then they won't commit. He goes, okay, bah, bah, and he catches them real hard. The newest thing that you see him do in the Nate Diaz fight, which I found very interesting, you don't see this a lot in his other fights. In fact, I don't think I ever saw him do this up until this fight, is the Muay Thai dump. Diaz was kind of sitting outside, not being active enough. He comes in and throws him back. He does this like 3 times in that fight. He succeeds at every one of them, just takes him right down. It's a quick technique, looks great for the judges. And honestly, I think it's good for him anyway because he needs a little bit more flash in his game so that people pay more attention to him. And this is a nice little flashy technique he can pull off easily. So as you can see, if this guy stays on the outside, he can pick him apart. And then the last thing is wrestling. We already talked about wrestling. If they start to drive in a lot, he gives the threat of wrestling. If they stay on the outside, he does the same thing. He's in here, and he'll come in and start hitting a single. When we talk about his wrestling in a little bit, man, his wrestling game is fantastic, and his transitions are fantastic, and he's very efficient at using them to his advantage. But in the striking context, that level change and also a constant threat of inactivity forces them more into the countering game. The threat of eating an elbow and getting taken down forces them into ranges you want. If they stay on the outside, they try to kick, he goes, okay. But most of the time, he's going to get what he wants, where he's here, and he can check hook, or he can stay here, pop, 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 over and over and over again. And so these guys get kind of put in a dilemma where they don't have any options outside of what he has given them. And this is the excellence of the Leon Edwards game. So stay tuned. In the next part, we're going to talk about his clinch system and why he can consistently go back to using the same thing in clinching and takedowns and why it works so well for him. All right, so let's talk about clinches, takedowns, and ground game when you talk about Leon Edwards. Generally, when you talk about clinches, his primary objective, to turn this guy back to the cage, and so he can be up against this guy on the cage. Or 2, to extract an elbow him in the face as an exit strategy, and disconnect safely without taking any damage. These are what he's looking for. He always does one of these 2 things, with very rare exceptions. Every once in a while you'll see him throw a knee and stuff like that, but you will consistently see him use this over and over again. Now there's a couple ways that this might happen. Let's talk about it from the striking context first, where somebody's trying to overcommit. This is where he will often engage in a clinch. Now, sometimes it could be something as simple as a collar tie into an elbow, but really what he likes to do is get an underhook. His goal is always to have particularly a right hand underhook, and then a left hand either underhook or overhook. It doesn't matter whether he's double unders or over under. If he's a double under, what he's going to do is, as this guy releases pressure, he's going to pull this out and elbow. But if he is an over under, at any point he can elbow and then disconnect. And he does it safely after he just deals damage. And he likes to hit those elbows because that bone on bone gets a nice cut, and the judges see how bloody this guy is, and it looks really good for him. But his primary objective is to put him against the wall. Why? Because as he's here, like I said, this is why he wants this right hand as an underhook. Because from right here, he wants to be able to turn this guy as he comes in. This is why sometimes you'll see him put his back foot against the cage. He does this against RDA a bunch, where he puts his back foot against the cage as he comes in. He gets this underneath. If he can get the collar tie, he'll try to collar tie an elbow. He did that a bunch. But if you can get the underhook, that's even better. So that as he gets pressed forward, and as this guy commits forward, he gets his head underneath, gets the underhook, and then just redirects him into the cage. He uses energy against him. Classic judo, right? So this is when they start committing that way. The other way you'll see it happen a lot is from wrestling defense and takedown defense. He'll stay on the outside. He knows that a lot of guys from here, they're going to shoot on him, so he's already prepared for that. His philosophy is keep your elbows tight to prevent an underhook at all costs. Then from there, he's going to try to get underneath. And once again, he's going to try to get an underhook with the right hand, especially is what he's looking for. He will sometimes switch, but he prefers the right hand underhook so that he can start coming in here and redirecting him. If for some reason he cannot get anything inside, this guy's too tight or he's too low, he switches to the whizzer and he puts this guy's face in the mat. From there, he tries to get to top or he gets back on his feet. Usually, he's really good at whipping this guy around and getting back up. So that's the majority of what you're going to see out of clinching. Same thing when he gets up against the cage. Somebody puts him up against the cage. Okay, he's going to fight to get his underhook, get an overhook, turn this guy, and now he's got him up against the cage. And we're going to talk about what he does against him in a second. Now, offensive wrestling, he is fantastic. Generally, his philosophy is once again to put the guy against the cage. In fact, sometimes I think commentators have made a mistake where they go, oh, he's failed at this takedown because this guy's hopping back like this, and they're like, look how good he's defending. I think that's Leon Edwards letting that happen. He gets in here and he'll get a single leg, and he'll either walk him backwards or turn him and put him into the cage. And meanwhile, this guy's all proud of himself. Look at me defending. Next thing you know, he's against the cage. This is something Leon Edwards will do a lot. However, if he can get the takedown in the middle of the ring, who's going to fight that, right? That's great. But most of the time, you'll see it's easier for him to just get a hold of this guy and put him up against the cage and finish his takedowns from there. But that's not to say he can't do it. In the Barbarino fight is one of the best transitions of wrestling I've ever seen, where he comes in here and he tries to come in, do the outside trip as he falls forward. He has the leg and the body. He realizes it's not going to happen. He comes up to the body, switches, and Uchimata. It's a nice transition from a deep outside trip as he tries to come in here, realizes it doesn't happen, tries to get to the body so he can either come out the back or something like that or pitch it back, realizes it's not going to happen, and Uchimata. Very, very high level stuff. That transition and recognition from bing, bang, boom was very, very nicely done. It's one of the best transitions you'll see of wrestling in MMA. So he has the skill set to do fantastic wrestling defense and takedowns. When he does get taken down, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but he's a cool customer on the ground as well. Now, when he backs guys up to the cage, like I said, why does he keep trying to get guys there? Well, it's easy for him to finish stuff. Either one, a couple things will happen from here. Generally speaking, you'll see him get to an underhook, get his head underneath, and he's going to look for one of a couple things. Either one, he's going to drop and pull him up with the classic double leg, or two, if this guy starts pitching him over, he goes, and you'll see this in the Nate Diaz fight, like 3 or 4 times he does this, consistently does this, shrugs him forward, and gets to the back control, then takes him down. And what's interesting is when he does this, he gets underneath, and he's floating, he shrugs out of it, gets to the back, and then he turns back and dumps him. So instead of doing like a valley drop, or like Peter Yan doing that reverse Tayatoshi, what he does is, once he gets him against, they start pulling his head across, he goes, okay, shrugs, and then dumps. He will hit this over and over again. He's very good at this. So generally what you'll see is one of a couple of different types of takedowns he'll go for. Like I said, it's either the classic double leg, he'll drop down, or he shrug, gets to the back, and then dumps. And he's comfortable doing it either way. If he feels like it's not happening, he can always disengage with an elbow strike. Now, against the cage, he has started doing more spinning elbows as an exit. Very similar to what you see out of like Yuri Prochowski or John Jones. We've talked about this a bunch, where John Jones does the 2-on-1, and then he can always exit out. Leon Edwards, he gets it here. He doesn't feel like it's happening for whatever reason. Spinning elbow, exit out. Most of the time, what he prefers though is still, just like he normally does, comes out, elbow strike, disengage. Alright, so now let's talk about Leon Edwards' ground game. And his jiu-jitsu is very interesting in that he pretty much is a half guard and half back player. And what I like about this is this. Half guard is a nice universal position that's easy to always filter your game back into. So if you have a very strong half guard, it's easy to end up there a lot. And this is what I'm talking about, where like Leon Edwards is very much a high percentage player. Everything he does is about putting things in high percentage. And so he tries to filter on focusing his defense against their high percentage. He tries to focus his game on things that he can put to that are high percentage that he can constantly go back to. So instead of spending a lot of time doing a lot of different positions, he gets good at 2 positions, half guard and half back. So what happens is that, what I like about it is this. So like in half guard, let's say you're in a position here where you're side control. It's easy to just get a foot inserted. Same thing for mount. You know, if I'm here and I'm mounted, all I have to do a lot of times is this, and now instead of being mounted, I'm half guard. And so he's really good at this type of stuff. And what I find interesting is that his half guard game is kind of unique. instead of playing a game where it's kind of like the classic half guard game, he plays kind of like this unique sort of loose half guard. And what he does a lot of times is he puts his head on the far hip here, and he does this to kind of keep his head safe. And he stays pretty compact. Now, you will sometimes see him do things like playing a loose lockdown and stuff like that, where his feet are in here. But a lot of times what he's going to do is he's going to put his head in deep. He might be even trying to go for an underhook here. And it's almost like he's trying to go for a deep half. But what he's really trying to do is just keep his head tight so that he doesn't get his head pounded in. And he's relaxed. He's stoic, and he's a cool customer right here. Then from here you might see him do things like get a butterfly hook in and return himself to either a butterfly or a half butterfly. And then from right here, you start seeing him pushing off of them to get back to his feet. You'll see a lot of that type of stuff. But essentially, he's going to stay calm. He's going to protect himself. And this is what I'm saying, like, his jiu-jitsu, what makes it so good is it's very defense-oriented. And on the ground, he's just going to try to keep himself safe long enough to either wear out the round or to get himself to a position where he can create space and get back to his feet. Now, from the top position, which you'll see a lot of times, once again, he goes to half guard. When he takes guys down, he prefers half guard. What you'll see from here is he'll start trying to cross-face him a little bit. He might start dropping some elbows and some knees and stuff like that in here. This is common. You'll see him throw this knee a lot. But what's interesting is this. He does this kind of like transition that is a little bit uncommon because it relies a little bit on athleticism and a little bit on trickery. And what he's going to do is he's going to transfer the half back on the other side. And you'll see him do stuff like controlling this wrist or throwing knees. But what he's really trying to do is get them to turn in here so that now he can extract this foot and switch over to this side and get his foot in here. And now he ends up in this half back position. Now, this is where I think if he wanted to, he could get to a back control. But he seems content to hang out here and do a little bit of damage. Now, from right here, I personally would probably roll him to the other side. But a lot of times what happens is he's up against the cage, so he doesn't have room to roll them anyway. So he kind of hangs out here, he threatens chokes, and if he gets back up, he gets back up. It's not the end of the world. But what he's doing is threatening and trying to go for attacks that mostly look good to the judges. I'll be honest, I think a lot of his top game is about showing that he can get to a position, get to dominance, ride him for a little bit, and show he's in control. Because when they start choosing rounds and stuff like that, it's a nice way of punctuating a round. That if it's a little bit close in the striking, if he can show a little bit of ride time here, that's going to look really good for him. Obviously I think if he had more space, he'd prefer to roll them over and start getting this hook in on the other side. With Nate Diaz, he had a really hard time. He was actually trying to do that. But Diaz is, he's a smart customer. He keeps his knee up so that Leon Edwards had a hard time getting his foot over. And he ends up getting nothing off of it except ride time. And once again, when you talk about the judges, that's not a bad thing when he's a guy who wins mostly by decisions. So that's the majority of his jiu-jitsu game. And then, like I said, it's mostly get to a half guard, either top or bottom. And then if he's on the bottom, he keeps his head safe, and he takes his time, plays defense, doesn't let his head get pounded in and stuff like that. And then if he is playing more of an offensive, if he's in top, he's mostly trying to get to that half back. And you'll see him get to the half back a lot from his takedowns anyway. So as he pulls out legs for against the cage, he pulls out the legs for the double leg, he ends up in the half guard or the half back pretty easily because as this guy lands here on the side, if he can, he's going to come behind him. And this is very similar to what you see like Kamaru Usman do, where he likes to get this bottom wrist control and keep his head tight, and he hangs out here a lot, and he just rides him. And what this is a very difficult position to get back up from, and simultaneously this guy's got to now carry my weight a little bit. And even if I don't do a lot of damage, what I've done is I've exhausted him, and I look good to the judges. And that alone is worthwhile. If I can't get there, no problem. I go to my half guard, and I start throwing knees. I start throwing little shots to get little points added up. And then from here, if I can get a hold of a wrist, I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to switch over to the half back. And very much like I said, very similar to like what you see a Kamaru Usman do, where he's going to kind of ride this top hip now. So that's basically it. Anyway, Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Make sure you smash the subscribe button and share with your friends.